In our Price of the American Dream presentation, getting ready for it, one of the very first things we're going to present to a seller is what we call an appreciation table. The appreciation table shows, for example, in this case, the seller desires to ask $415,000. Well, you go, Brian, well, how do I know they want to ask $415,000? Let's say they're a for-sale by owner, or they're an expired listing, or you simply interviewed the seller on the telephone, you did an excellent job, and you got the seller to volunteer the price they're thinking of. You might say, Brian, the seller doesn't ever volunteer the price to me. I would think it has something to do with your initial call to seller script. The questions you ask. Do you ask the seller the question, do you all have a feel for the price you want to ask? And the seller says to you, you know, Brian, we have no idea what the price is. Well, my experience has been everybody has some opinion about the price. Because in this case, if you'd say the seller we know is asking $415,000 wanted to, if you said $200,000, the seller's going to say, oh, that low, which of course means they had a price in mind. So every seller has a price in mind. In our initial call to seller script, we go through a series with you on that, and this training will, I believe, has a 95% chance of you getting the seller to volunteer their number. So let's just go ahead and put the $415,000 in here. In this illustration, we're not going to check this box. I'll show you that in a different video. So you're on a listing interview, and you're in front of a seller, and you can see they purchased the home for $310,000 in 1999. Well, how do you know this? It was in the MLS, or the public tax records, or the realist tax records. You found it somewhere online. We can't utilize the software for properties if we do not know what the person paid for it. That's going to be the regular MLS. This is dependent upon knowing what the seller paid, which is why we have to have this information up here. And by the way, if you don't know what the seller paid, you might be able to do a fair guesstimate. And we've done that several times in training with agents where they said, I don't know, I know what year they bought it in. It doesn't say the sale price because they purchased new construction. Well, you can look back at the data, it's a little bit more work, and estimate the approximate purchase price that they did way back in 95 or 99 or 2006. A little bit more work, but you'll see it's going to provide you with a tremendous amount of information. Let's get back to the graph, this table. You can see they've owned it for 167.1 months. And here's a question we want to ask the homeowner. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have a question for you. You paid $310,000. You bought it for 167.1 months ago. I'm curious, if you had to do what we call PFA, which is a real estate term, collect from air, can you tell me what you think the appreciation rate has been over the years you've owned it? Because obviously some of those years, 06, 07, 08, 09, 2010, 11, part of 12, were depreciating. But you had a lot of good years in there that were appreciating. If you were to venture a guess, what would you say you thought the appreciation was per year? Kind of ignore this column for right now. In fact, as the agent, you could put a piece of paper over this column. Just cover it up and ask the seller what do they think the growth rate was. If there's two sellers there, ask them both to share their opinion. What happens then, if the seller says, well, I think we grew about 3% per year because doggone it, it's a good area and I live here. You pull the document away. You pull which is covering this section, and the seller said 3%, and it pulls out the number at $467,000. And what will happen here? One of the sellers might say, oh no, that's too high. It could be around 2% per year, or a little bit more than 2% per year. Now, what the other spouse didn't know was going to happen was the one was going to volunteer their number. And I worked very lengthy years on this. How do I get the seller to always volunteer their number for me? And so we got between the initial phone call to seller and this script and all kinds of graphs to continually get the seller to express their problem. And their problem is their price opinion. And they think too much of their property, or they need too much, whatever the reason is. This is an extremely important table to show people, just to get them the perspective about the idea of depreciation and appreciation. So that's the only purpose of this graph, is to be able to say, cover up this area here, cover it all up, and just show on the paper, ask the seller, what do you think the annual rate of return has been since you've owned the property? And it's especially in marketplaces that people bought it in 2005, 6, 7, 8. Almost everybody who resold in 2012 and possibly 2013 is red. The majority of these properties are negative and lost money every single year. It's just hard for the seller to understand what's going to happen to them. These two rows over here just show what the approximate gain or loss would have been per year. Back in the heyday, I remember sellers, when I asked them the question, showed this chart to them. I asked them, what do you think the appreciation rate would have been in this quarter? Because in those days, we didn't see depreciation. The number one answer I would get from sellers would have been 10% per year appreciation. Well, obviously, when you show them the number at 10%, they're going to, whoops, I'm a little bit too high. And one of those parties, if you're having two people in front of you, will almost always say, we think we're more like 3 or 4 or 5%. Well, now you have it out of the table in what the seller is thinking. That allows us to go through all the other presentations. All right, so thanks for watching.